Hey, Brandon.
Hey Julia, how are you?
I'm good. I'm keeping at a safe distance from everyone I know. But I called you up because a lot of people out there in the space that I cover and you work in, the clean energy space, are looking for ways to get through these crazy times. Obviously, we're coping with the coronavirus outbreak at the same time as now an impending economic recession or at least a downturn. And there's going to be big implications for the clean energy sector. And as we know, Congress did pass a $2 trillion stimulus bill, probably the first of a couple, it seems. And it didn't explicitly address energy, but I know you've been tracking it, and I know there are some parts of that bill that could actually affect the clean energy sector or clean energy companies. So I was hoping you could walk us through that.
So I'm on the board of a couple earlier stage clean energy companies.
Although we should note we also do a podcast together every week. I should have led with that in your introduction.
Yes, the most important job. But so I'm very familiar with how particularly earlier stage clean energy companies are dealing with this crisis related to COVID. And most, earlier stage companies do not have a lot of runway of cash. If they're a venture-backed company, they might have a few months or a year and a half of runway. And so if you're looking for help, you have impacts on your budget, there are a couple programs with the Small Business Administration that you should take a very close look at because it could be very cheap, non-dilutive capital for your clean energy company. So the two programs are the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, which you can access up to $2 million in debt. And then as part of the $2.2 trillion bill that you referenced, Julia, there was $350 billion allocated to small businesses where you can access up to $10 million in cheap debt on very favorable terms. It basically applies to any company that is under 500 people. And there's a formula to develop how much of the loan you can take. So it's basically like you take 1 year of your average monthly costs of payroll, mortgage or rent, utilities, and you multiply that by 4, and you come up with that number, and it's the smaller number of that or $10 million, and that's what you're eligible for. But the great news is part of that loan will be forgiven. So then you take your payroll costs for the next 8 weeks of keeping people on payroll, and the government will forgive that portion of the loan. So that's like free money to pay your people for the next 8 weeks.
Okay, interesting. So while not explicitly calling out these clean energy companies, they do qualify, correct?
They do. What many clean energy companies, at the earlier stage need to be aware of, though, is there's this affiliation rule. And so if you're an earlier stage clean energy company, you probably have less than 500 people, right? But if you're venture owned or private equity owned, basically they roll you up with other portfolio companies and all of those numbers of employees count. So if you're in a portfolio with many other companies, they can add up to more than 500 employees. Now, the government is trying to work through that. They're going to issue regulations on that potentially this week to address that issue. But it's something you just need to be mindful of and pay close attention to as you go through that process. And one of the great things about this as well is that a lot of people are worried about, well, it's government, they're going to be overwhelmed. How long is this going to take? For this payment protection program, you actually go through a private sector lender, like a bank. And then the SBA guarantees that loan that they make to you. And some are claiming that they can do this same day. You fill out the application online and you can get funding on that day.
Wow. Awesome. I think people are still trying to understand what all was in this bill. So I think that's super helpful to have you break it down. In just the last few words, I guess how optimistic are you for the clean energy sector right now? And I guess for these earlier new market entrants in particular, should they, how can they weather through this? Are you heartened that there's a way to do that?
Well, I think this is also a time for the clean energy community, the business community, to get engaged on what's happening on Capitol Hill, because what they're doing will matter greatly to this industry. So there's many of the trade associations are engaged in this debate on trying to do tax credit extensions that many are familiar with, ITC, PTC, EV tax credit. But this is the time now to get active, because this is all going to happen over the next several weeks. And so there could be trillions of dollars of infrastructure available. How is that going to apply to clean energy? Now is the time to get in touch with your trade associations, to get in touch with your legislative, local elected officials, members of Congress, your senators, your governors, to get as many people advocating for this as possible. So I'm optimistic that political interests can align, because Democrats are prioritizing clean energy and climate. Republicans are saying this is an election year, we can't have an economic catastrophe on our hands, so they're willing to entertain ideas that were probably previously off the table but are now on the table. So if you have your voice heard with your elected officials, there is a chance that you can get some government support to keep going and potentially expand your business.
And we are seeing resources come out of offices like Senator Marco Rubio's, helping guide businesses as to where to find the economic support laid out in the first bill, and we'll try to include some links to those resources. For now, though, thanks for the breakdown, Brandon. That's super helpful.
Happy to be helpful. Let us know what we can do.
Bye. Speak to you
Bye.
next week.
Yes.